Welcome to the researching phase of the writing process. In this little module, I will be explaining the scientific method as well as the issues around researching to be aware of and implement. As you look at this chart of the writing process, you see that the researching phase is highlighted. When we research, which means we get the facts we need to have in order to answer a letter or an email or an inquiry of some kind, two elements are involved, the subjective and the objective. The subjective element is how I feel about it, my own subjective point of view. The objective is, what do I find in the literature or in the documents or in the interviews or in the conversations that help clarify the situation of the research. Also, you'll see that between the two poles of subjective and objective, I put in this scientific method, because we ought to rely on the scientific method when we're doing this work. Many of us have heard about the scientific method, but we don't necessarily understand it. And so I will present a short history of the scientific method to clarify it. In the time between 400 and 300 before the current era, the Greeks in southern Italy and in Greece created an intellectual revolution. They pointed out that all events in our world had underlying principles, and that these underlying principles were discoverable, and they made logical sense. So, for the Greeks, if an explanation was logical, then it was probably true. We know, however, that many of the things that Aristotle said were so were in fact wrong, and proved wrong by later scientists. So we know that their idea, though correct in the sense that we need to understand something logically, may have led to incorrect understandings of the world around us. While Europe was in a deep freeze intellectually and culturally, many of its intellectuals had moved to Arab countries because the Arab world welcomed them, and the Arab world valued thinking and understanding. In the Arab world at this time, there were many scientists and intellectuals discovering things. For example, the algebra was invented. Better measurement was found. The astronomers were keeping more accurate records, and so on. The Arab world also had the texts of Greek scientists, philosophers, poets, playwrights, and so were able to draw on that knowledge base as well. The Arabs looked at the Greek idea that explanations should be logical and said one more thing. Yes, they should be logical, but we must test that logical explanation against reality. My own personal theory about why this is so is that the Arabs lived in the world of the desert, and they knew that you could have illusions where you think there's water there, but when you get there, there's no water. So it makes sense that they evolved to requiring that concepts and ideas be tested against reality. Next, the Crusades happened, and the Crusades were an enormous influx of people into the Near East. In those days, when you went on crusade, you didn't go like soldiers to Afghanistan. You actually took your whole family, your aunt, your uncle, your cousin, your grandfather, and you all went on the crusade. When they got to the Near East, these people were astonished by what was available. Fine silks, wonderful perfumes, different foods, and a variety of ideas. The Crusades brought these ideas back with them to Europe, and in 1268 Roger Bacon announced the scientific method, which, as you know, requires the proof that the proposition be tested against reality. And how do we do that best? By being able to predict based on our concept, and then see if reality actually turns out that way. You might think about the scientific method as being a significant improvement in the quality of human investigation of the world around us. In 1000 AD, most people on this planet lived in hovels with dirt floors, bathed once a year if lucky, ate horrible food, died in childbirth, and so on. Life was nothing like it is today. We can look around today and see the results of the scientific method. Buildings, energy plants, airplanes, advanced mathematics, satellites, homes with bathrooms and showers, and so on. So this small tool has had a most profound impact on our lives every day. The steps of the scientific method are relatively easy to talk about, but very difficult to do. First, we use the scientific method when we are faced with a dilemma, and we try to figure out what's going on. Then, we research to look at what data is available. What do we know? What do we understand? What's in the library? What do other people know? And so on. Once we've sort of gathered the facts and the situation, we form a hypothesis. In other words, we get together and think about, how do I explain all of these data? How do I explain all of what is going on here? And that's our hypothesis. Once we've got an hypothesis, we need to take this step, and this is the difficult step. We need to find information and data that contradicts our hypothesis. The psychological reason for this is that we formed the hypothesis based on the data we had. So we already are biased in our favor. But the key is to find out if there is other information that disproves what we think. This is how it works in the scientific community. You might already know this. But once researcher A publishes his article about what he researched and what he found and what his conclusions are, 20 scientists all over the world jump into their labs and try to prove this person wrong. In this way, we eliminate ideas that don't explain our world accurately, and we get closer and closer to the truth of the situation. You will be presented with a list of items here that deal with the problem of a cash register. As you watch these items, also watch your mind and see how it processes the various items. It will be interesting to see how your conclusions or hypotheses change as each new piece of information is given to you. As you do your research, it is important for you to keep track of your facts or of the findings that you make, because when you get back to writing, you may not remember them all. One of the truths we know is that physiologically, we generally remember facts about 3 days in short-term memory. And then what gets transferred to long-term memory is our conclusions. So it's important to find a means to manage tracking your findings so that you are aware of what you discovered. As I've said elsewhere, and any good book on writing will tell you, it is more powerful to write with facts than to write with personal judgments. Unfortunately, if we do not track our facts, when we sit down to write, we don't remember them. All we have are our personal judgments. And so our writing looks weak and unspecific. And to make our writing rich and informative, accurate, as well as descriptive, we must use facts. So this means that we must keep track of them. Now that we have covered the notion of researching as part of the writing process, we will move on to strategizing, which is the second phase of writing.